I would like to invite Watthana Suksiripakonchai. He will present entitled Investigation of Thai University Student Attitude Toward Native, Non-Native Speakers of English. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to listen to my presentation. As you see on the board and as the moderator said earlier, that my title is called Investigation of Thai Students' Attitudes Towards Native and Non-Native Speakers of English. So basically this research is in relation to the emerging concept of English as an international language or English as a lingua franca. As we all know that these days people speak English in almost every corner of the world. People from one side of the world who come from a speech community, they will speak with an accent or with a pronunciation model that is they think belongs to their speech community or they think is appropriate to their context. Whereas other people who come from another side of the world will likely speak with a version or a variety that they think is appropriate to their context as well. So when they come together, often there's an issue in relation to mutual understanding because of the different varieties used throughout the world. So that is the issue in relation to intelligibility. We want to be able to speak or produce utterances that are intelligible among international users. The other problem that I want to raise here is the issue regarding the native and non-native speaker of English dichotomy. Who is then considered as a native speaker of English and who is considered as a non-native speaker of English? This is a very contentious area. If we look back to 1985, when Katru, for those in the field of English language teaching, will know that he proposed circles of the English, having the inner circle countries, such as those from the UK, the USA, Australia, and New Zealand, being native speakers of English, and the outer circle countries having the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, India, as people who use English as a second language, and places like Thailand here, China, or Korea are those who are considered as people who use English as a foreign language. But this concept has received so much criticism because it's based primarily on geography. A lot of people these days would argue that people from Singapore or the Philippines or India are actually native speakers of English. So really, it is. It depends on interpretation of someone who will now argue, okay, people from the UK the people from the UK are native speakers of English, or people from Thailand could be considered as native speakers of English. And another thing related to the background of this research is students' attitudes. If they have positive attitudes about something, for example, learning English, if they only want to sound like a native speaker only, or that is their ultimate goal, then sometimes it is difficult, or as Jennifer Jenkins has said, that it's not only unnecessary, but it's unrealistic to just sound like a native speaker. And lastly, pronunciation models. We want to explore other varieties. We don't want to only look at pronunciation models that belong to the native speakers only, but we want to try to expose ourselves or our students to non-native speaker of English pronunciation models as well. So for this research, I've posted up some research questions. The first one is, what are the students' attitudes towards native speakers of English? Second, what are the students' attitudes towards non-native speakers of English? And lastly, how do pronunciation models affect students' pronunciation learning outcome? So move on to the methodology. It's quite a small project. I had 20 participants, 20 students from the airline business program. They were all in the second year at Suksiripakonchai University, where I work. I asked them to complete an intelligibility test, the comprehensibility test, and some questionnaires, and then I came to my conclusions. Just want to briefly talk about each item. With the intelligibility, when we talk about intelligibility, we can talk about the listening ability as well as the speaking ability. For this is mostly listening ability, because the students were asked to listen to 5 different utterances made by 6 speakers of English, and they were asked to write down what they heard from each sentence, and they were also asked to tick whether they thought this sentence was produced by a native speaker of English or a non-native speaker of English. The 6 speakers, as I mentioned earlier about the circles of English proposed by Katru, I divided the speakers into 3 groups. The first 2 speakers from Australia and New Zealand, they were from the inner circle countries. The Indian speaker of English and the Filipino from the outer circle countries, and lastly Thai speaker of English and the Chinese speaker of English, they come from the expanding circle. So these were the sentences, or when we speak, we often we prefer to use the term utterance. So these were the utterances that I asked them to produce. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard flight QF2 to Bangkok. They were made by different speakers. So each statement had different pronunciation models. And students were asked to listen to this, and they would tick in the 2 columns at the end that they thought, okay, this utterance was made by a native speaker, or this one was made by a non-native speaker. The comprehensibility test, the students were also asked to do this against each statement. For example, back to statement number 1, they were asked to rate if they thought the statement number 1 was easy for them to understand, or it was very difficult for them to understand. So they were asked to do all this. And some questionnaires relating to their attitudes towards the native speakers of English and the non-native speakers of English, such as number 1, I prefer teachers who are native speakers of English. Number 5, I find the way of speaking like a native speakers of English more attractive than non-native ones. Or number 10, they think that the only way to become successful in English is to be able to sound like a native speaker of English. So all these, they were asked if they agreed, or they didn't care, or they disagreed with the statement. And I had some further questions just to ask them to provide more reason how they thought about the native speakers of English and the non-native speakers of English. With the results, the intelligibility test came out not surprised. They thought that the Indian speaker of English was a non-native speaker, and the Thai, of course, they thought that non-native speaker. But as we would expect, that they thought the New Zealander and the Australian were the speakers of English. And mostly the words in the reds were the ones that they couldn't really identify. So in that case, they thought that these words were unintelligible or very difficult to identify what they were. And with the comprehensibility test, it's for many people, they would think, oh, the voice is difficult for me to understand. It falls under the Australian, being the native speaker of English. They thought the Australian was very difficult to understand, whereas many of them thought that a Thai speaker of English was very easy to understand, because that's it's something that they're used to. It's called familiarity. We're used to hearing the accent. We're familiar with how we pronounce each consonant segment or phonics in Thai, and we share the same native language, so that's not surprising that we thought the Thai speaker of English was easy to understand. Plus, they also thought that the Indian speaker of English was not very difficult to understand. In relation to the questionnaires, all of the participants thought that sounding or to approximate as much as possible to the native speaker of English was more attractive. So they all wanted to sound like either an American or an English speaker, or even Australian and New Zealander. But to me, I didn't think they would. They were aware that even among these countries, within the UK, for example, you have different dialects. Someone from England, from London, will speak very different from someone who comes from Edinburgh. The Scottish accent is known as being very unique and quite difficult to understand to a certain extent. And many people agree that they would like to have teachers who were native speakers of English. So, in other words, they preferred teachers who were native speakers of English compared to the Thai speakers. And it's interesting to see here that if you look at number 10, many people thought that sounding like a native speaker was not the only way to become successful as a speaker of English. So really, if we can try to say that for Thai people, we might want to try to become a successful Thai speaker of English, not a successful native speaker of English in that sense. And for the last 3 questions, I asked them to answer. Number 1, do you want to learn English pronunciation with native or non-native English teachers? I asked them why. They said yes, they would like to study with other native speakers because they were the owners of the English language and they have correct pronunciation. As I said earlier, that it is now a contentious area. What is then correct? Because many people might say that, okay, someone from Singapore, when their accent is also correct, because you know that Singaporean speakers of English, they're born speaking English, so of course the way they speak is just like the way that people from England, they're born speaking English. The concept is the same, that they're both native to the language that they speak. And again, people argue that English no longer belongs to the inner circle countries. The English language belongs to the world, which means that everyone now speaks English. The number of non-native speakers of English actually outnumber the native speakers of English. So really, we could argue that the owners of the English language are everyone in the world. And question number 2, do you want to be able to speak English like a native speaker of English, or is it not important to you? And why? They said yes, because they want to be able to communicate with foreign nationals, and because native speakers sound better. But then we have to consider that, okay, you want to communicate with foreign nationals, but not necessarily that you communicate with an American speaker of English or a British speaker of English all the time. From this side of the world, we probably speak to the Chinese speakers of English more than we speak to someone from the UK or the US or New Zealand. And lastly, do you find the way native speakers of English easier or more difficult to understand compared to the non-native ones? And they said no, native speakers speak too fast, very difficult to understand, and with native speakers they enjoy listening to them, but it's still very difficult to understand, but they sound more authentic. Okay, my time is up. I just want to quickly sum up that I think attitudes are very important when it comes to learning pronunciation, and it's not just native speaker pronunciation models only that we can teach our students, but other varieties are also important as well, such as the Thai pronunciation maybe is probably more appropriate within our context. Thank you.
Okay, one question. Yes.